What's really happening behind closed doors at the White House? Are Trump and Netanyahu leading the region towards another historic breakthrough? Or are we about to witness a dangerous gamble? There are whispers of a deal with Hamas and suggestions of a Nobel Peace Prize, all while Qatar lurks in the background. Is a bold new strategy unfolding, or is Israel walking into a trap? Coming up on today's Israel Undiplomatic.
Hi, I'm Mark Regev, and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm here with my co-host, the audacious Ruthie Blum. Welcome, Ruthie.
Well, thank you, Mark. We got a lot to talk about this week as usual, but I think today, especially given these historic circumstances.
Yes, we are speaking as Prime Minister Netanyahu is still in Washington. He's had a number of meetings so far with the president and with other members of the administration. And as we discussed last week, there are big issues on the agenda. Maybe we should dive into them one by one. Talk of a ceasefire in Gaza and a hostage deal. What do you think?
Okay, so, unfortunately, that is the one thing in everything they're discussing that disturbs me the most. They were celebrating this great victory, sort of joint operation against Iran's nuclear facilities. And but the business with the hostage release deal, I was very concerned when Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy, Trump's Middle East envoy, referred to it as, he said, okay, there were 4 outstanding issues that were an obstacle to a deal. And now there's only one outstanding one. And this is as an Israeli delegation is in Doha negotiating. But the language he used was very worrisome. The language he used was, he said, and when I hope we're optimistic that we're going to get a deal done. And then we should hope for a lasting peace. Now, you cannot have peace with Hamas, not a lasting peace, not a not lasting peace. This is not a peace deal. This is ransom for hostages that Hamas kidnapped after murdering, abusing, raping, beheading, 1,200 innocent Israelis, and then taking 250 others captive. So, to talk about this in some context of peace is really nauseating. But I hope it's just language. It's just Diplo speak, because he even said that in the first phase, we should get 10 live hostages out and 9 dead bodies, and then we'll see after another 60-day ceasefire. Now, you realize that getting half of these hostages alive, we're totally devastating the families who don't know which 10, and the others don't know, and what happens later. And this idea of some kind of lasting peace, we are hoping that this ceasefire, I am hoping this ceasefire is not a lasting peace. It is a necessary evil to get as many hostages out of the clutches of those monsters as possible.
So let's look at these words that he used, lasting peace. So there was a sizable body of opinion in Israel before October 7th that it was possible to reach some sort of modus vivendi with Hamas. Not that they liked us, not that they had somehow become, Democrats and Democrats with little d, yeah, that they were, interested in good governance and so forth. But the idea is that through carrot and a stick, you could have a stable situation with Hamas as your neighbor. And October 7th sort of totally destroyed that sort of worldview. And there's a strong consensus in Israel today that Hamas cannot stay in charge of Gaza when this is over. So the question I would ask Steve Witkoff, if I was speaking to him instead of you, though I much prefer speaking to you, of course, is that when he said, a lasting peace, is he talking about lasting peace with Hamas or lasting peace without Hamas? Because I think the absence of Hamas is the crucial ingredient for everlasting peace. And the Prime Minister just said a few hours ago, he said the goal of our operation hasn't changed, and that is Hamas will be disarmed, that they will no longer control the Gaza Strip, and that Gaza will no longer be the sort of threat it was in the past to Israel. And he hasn't changed on those goals. And I think on those issues, there's a large consensus in the Israeli public that that has to be the final outcome. So I'm hopeful that when Witkoff said what he said, he meant peace without Hamas, not peace with Hamas.
Well, I totally agree. And we know that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are cooking up other peace deals in the region, and hopefully that will have an effect on Gaza. But here's the trouble. When he said there were 4 outstanding issues and only 1 remains, well, we know that every 4 outstanding obstacle, as far as Hamas is concerned, every single one of them is something Israel cannot agree to. So whatever they are, we only know partially. We don't know every detail. We hear a lot of journalists talking about it, but we don't know 100%. But again, if what Hamas wants is guarantees that Israel does not resume the war after 60 days, then it's impossible to say that it'll be peace without Hamas. And by the way, I'm going to reiterate, because I know that you disagree with me on this, or you're hesitant to say it, or whatever, is that it's not just not Hamas in Gaza. No Palestinian authority can rule Gaza, period. Okay, maybe in when we're all dead and buried, long gone, and when apples grow on cherry trees, as I like to say, some Palestinians there will be some kind of entity, then we could have some kind of peace. Although I don't believe that they're a nation that deserves a state. They certainly deserve human rights like all people, and they certainly can live. They should be able to live, even if Gaza were a Jewish state. But of course, that's not, that's not in the cards right now. And we don't know if Trump's vision of a Riviera in Gaza is viable. We do know that both Netanyahu and Trump said or hinted at the fact that there are many countries willing to take in Gazans. And so we don't know what's going on. But I can tell you one thing. Whatever is going on, and I trust Netanyahu not to cave on this, but we don't know what carrots and sticks are happening there. But we know that if Hamas gets any kind of guarantees, and if we are forced to live up to those guarantees, unfortunately, we always do live up to them. Why unfortunately? Because as far as I'm concerned, we should get those hostages out in any way possible, and then kill everybody who's held them, and not abide by any stupid agreement that you should not be making with terrorists in the first place.
So I want to say something that I think needs to be said, and that is, in your remarks, you said, we don't know what's going on, and we're just hearing a lot of journalists talking, right? That actually, I think, is a sign that something very serious is going on. Because when there are all these leaks, and he said this and he said that, Netanyahu was quoted as saying by senior officials, and then Trump is quoted, that's a sign that, okay, business as usual. The minute there's this sort of deafness, there's this quiet, I think it means that something very serious is on the table. And whether that's the ceasefire deal with Gaza or the other issues which we're going to address shortly, but I think that's a sign that serious work is being done. Serious work is being done. That the Prime Minister meets with the President for an hour and a half in their second meeting, yes, one-on-one. I know that the Vice President was in there for a short period of time, but this is where real decisions are made. And I think we can be fairly sure as we can be about anything, that this is very serious. On your issue about the PA, it's like the PA, which presents itself to the world as, the moderate Palestinians. They say to the world, Hamas are the crazies, we're the sensible Palestinians. We're the ones you can walk with. So the Israeli public isn't there. Maybe in the past they were, but not anymore. Ever since the PA refused to condemn October 7th, in fact, justified October 7th. Until today, as we speak, they haven't condemned October 7th. The whole issue with paying people to kill Israeli citizens, right? The pay-for-slay policy that they have, the way they teach their children. I think before October 7th, there was a sort of a blaseness. We know they're not, Zionists, but what can we do, right? I think today in Israel there's an understanding that there's a real problem with the PA as well. The question is, and here I'm glad that I'm not the Prime Minister, because it's a tough decision. Let's say you were asked in Gaza to compromise on the PA, and that was a precondition for a breakthrough with an Arab country like Saudi Arabia. Is that, take a small blow there on one issue to get a big victory on another issue? That's where I might disagree with you. But I don't know if that's being discussed. I don't even know if that's on the table.
Look, you have to speak for yourself. When you say, maybe before October 7th, we thought this and that. No. Some of us never thought that about the PA, never since the Oslo Accords, never thought that Hamas was deterred, never thought that the PA was the moderate, never. Okay, maybe you did, and maybe some Israelis did. On the left, we know they did. But you can't say that about me because I never did and I never thought so. And all you had to do is read what they wrote in Arabic. Now, you don't need to know Arabic because, today everyone's translating it. All you have to do is read. You read everything they say and everything Arafat said and everything Mahmoud Abbas says. So it's not that they didn't condemn October 7th. They paid the terrorists to do that. They just are in a rivalry with Hamas. So forget about the moderate business. Okay, there are no.
Can I just remind you? I'm just going to interrupt you for 30 seconds.
Yes.
It's not just Mark Regev, but I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu himself negotiated with the PA. Now, I'm sure he had no illusions about that. But in the real world, you sometimes have to deal with unsavory customers.
And you think that because Prime Minister Netanyahu himself had over the years said this and that and negotiated, you think I approved of it?
I'm sure you didn't. I'm sure you
didn't. And it's not that I accept everything that Benjamin Netanyahu does, hands down. I do admire him immensely for what he has done, how he has played this game of chess since October 7th. I totally. And each time I got disappointed in him, I was proven wrong. And right now, let's bring that back to what you said, that there's real radio silence on what actually is going on behind the scenes. And this is good because when the last time we saw something weird happening, and the Israeli journalist said, "Oh, you see now Trump is mad at Netanyahu." Actually, the Iran operation was being planned. And so now everybody should shut up because what Trump did was fake out all the journalists and all the enemies, and so did Netanyahu, and there were no leaks, as you said, no leaks, and this amazing operation took place. First, Israel attacks, a surprise attack on Friday the 13th of June. Nobody expected it. Boom. And then a week later, Trump did the same thing, hit Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. It was beautiful, and nobody knew about it. And so, yes, I agree with you. At least I hope, and I really hope that what's going on is something that is going to force Hamas to release the hostages. Not 10, not this, and somehow, or I don't know what. I mean, obviously we've all, since October 7th, fantasized about an Entebbe-like raid that would rescue the hostages and kill the terrorists holding them. And we've lost faith in that, in our ability to do that. And as a result of being very careful about it, the war has been prolonged. But I will say one thing, this brings us to something really, really crucial in all of this that has to be said. Qatar's role in all of this. We have an Israeli delegation in Doha right now. Steve Witkoff said he'll head to Doha maybe on Friday if he sees that a deal is happening. Qatar is Hamas. Qatar funds, supports, houses Hamas. Qatar is responsible for Hamas. Qatar, in some ways, is more of a patron of Hamas than Iran, and we're treating it as some kind of benign mediator. It's Qatar's fault. I don't understand how Israel and America are treating it that way. I'm sure that Netanyahu is under no illusions about Qatar, but that doesn't mean. But somehow, all this pressure should be on Qatar, and Qatar should have, on October 8th, if at all, the pressure should have been put on Qatar. You force Hamas to give up those hostages, or you are in trouble. Our American bases won't be there. You are going to be, every punishment that can be thought of. But no, instead, they're mediators. How ridiculous is that?
So I agree with you on Qatar. I think Qatar is a problem. I think Qatar has had this very cynical game of playing both sides of the fence, that on one hand, they smile at the West and they have the American base. On the other hand, they support groups like Hamas and other Islamic Brotherhood groups across the Middle East, which are openly anti-Western and cause violence and murder, and not just against Jews. They want to destabilize the pro-Western regimes across the Middle East. And you add to that and as you know, for many years I was the government spokesperson. They totally bankroll Al Jazeera, which we can watch the English language, and that's bad enough, but the Arabic one is much worse. And Al Jazeera is this voice for anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, anti-Israel. It's a terrible, and it has this massive audience, and it's the station of choice of people like the Hamas people love it. You know, after previous rounds of fighting in Gaza, there was always a ceremony, and the people of Hamas gave a prize to Al Jazeera for their wonderful coverage, and rightly so. Their coverage was exactly what Hamas wanted. And so the Qataris, unfortunately, try to smile at the West and at the same time are sticking the knife in. And it should not be accepted. And I'm actually disappointed with Washington for allowing the Qataris to play this game. I think the Qataris have much greater leverage on Hamas than most people understand. And then with significant pressure on Qatar, you can probably deliver Hamas. And I think it's a pity that that hasn't been done. But can we spend 1 second on Iran? Because I would hope in the radio silence, to use your word, that's going on now, that there have been understandings reached between Israel and the United States about how to move forward. It's not clear there's going to be negotiations between the United States and Iran. I know the president announced it, but the Iranians denied that there are any such negotiations. So the jury's out on that until we actually see them, yes? I'd like there to be a deal. I'd like there to be inspectors going in there blowing up the Iranian nuclear sites, what hasn't been blown up already. But on the assumption that Iran's going to play a tough game, it's clear that Israel and the United States have to be ready once again to use force if they start rebuilding their program. And as we've said in the past, if Israel has a lower threshold than the United States, we should be willing to go it alone. And I would hope that out of these discussions in Washington this week, there's definitely, like we have with Lebanon and Hezbollah, the same model, that Israel has a green light to act if the Iranians try to reconstitute their nuclear or ballistic missile program.
Well, that I believe we know that Israel has. Why? Because President Trump at that dinner, when he was saying, oh, yes, and Iran, he even sort of quipped about how he let Iran fire missiles at air bases in the Middle East, that Iran told him we have to retaliate for what you did. And we said, okay, we'll empty out, we'll evacuate
and then
all our soldiers.
According to Trump, they asked him at the time, we can move the time if it's not convenient.
1 o'clock is fine. Okay, so he said that, but then he said, and now, of course, they want to talk, and we're hoping to make a peace deal with Iran or whatever. And then he said, but if not, we're prepared.
Correct.
To go the other route. So I trust him because we saw that. Now, another encouraging sign is that there are talks for Israel to purchase B-2 bombers, those stealth bombers that are the only ones that can hold the bunker busters that America used to blitz those nuclear sites. And if that's true, by the way, I would just want to stress again, because, I see this a lot in the international media. Oh, and Israel is getting all these gifts from Washington. Israel needs, gifts from Washington. No, we purchase weapons from America. Purchase. I think we need to stress that there is this myth.
I want to be fair to our American allies, yes, and I say this as a patriotic Israeli, but it's true that we purchase. But we also get from the U.S. Congress and from the administration, we get a certain aid. And
we do get
and we use that money, and so we have to.
Hold it.
Yes.
I didn't say we don't get aid, military aid from the United States. The United States gives aid to allies to be on the front lines of areas that it considers in its interest, and that is one thing. We get aid.
Yeah.
So does Egypt. There are other countries that get aid from the United States, and lots of it. We have a deal with the United States that when we're giving the aid, we purchase our weaponry from America. So it goes back into the American economy. We purchase it. And when President Biden withheld weapons, it was weapons we had already paid for. So I want to repeat that I think it would be great if America sold us the B-2 bombers, and mainly because what that would mean is that we're saying, okay, we don't expect you to do our, to help us if we need to attack Iran again. If you give us the planes, we can do it. And I have faith in our ability to do it. We know, although again, the U.S. Air Force is amazing, but so is the Israeli Air Force. And I have no doubt that we could do it. We're also closer geographically to Iran than America is. So anyway, I'm just saying that that would be a good sign. And I do trust about Iran. I trust that Trump, he's already proven himself, and so is Netanyahu. And as far as normalization deals with Saudi Arabia and other countries, Syria, I'm a little hesitant about, but okay, because, you put a tie on a terrorist, that doesn't make him not a terrorist, but we'll see. Okay, we'll see what happens there. It's Gaza that is still this weird problem. And the only encouraging sign about this is if these other countries finally agree to take in refugees from Gaza and agree to, I don't know, get the Hamas leaders, if they agree to be kicked out of Gaza and find a place elsewhere.
So there's a model that both of us, unfortunately, at least I am old enough to remember, and that is when Arafat left Beirut in 1982, right? He was forced out and he left with his PLO leadership and they all relocated to Tunis. And if the Hamas leadership is willing to do that, I think Israel will be willing to cease our fire and let them leave.
By the way, as long as we don't do what we did with Arafat, which was give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and bring him. So if we're not stupid, as usual, because of our peace fantasies, maybe we can do that. I don't know. Wherever we want them, as far away as possible.
The dilemma, of course, in Gaza is that for the foreseeable future, Israel has to have overriding security control. And everyone talks about, let's bring in Arab states and they can, moderate Arab states can help rebuild Gaza and create something new there. And if some people are allowed to leave who want to leave and it can all work and we can build something better, then Gaza will not be a threat. And that's the story, yes. But what's the bottom line? No Arab state that I know of is going to fight Israel's battles for it. And so though they might be willing to do humanitarian and reconstruction and I don't know, make sure that there is good housing for people who stay in Gaza, the bottom line is this: only Israel will fight Hamas and people like Hamas. And therefore, you have to have sort of an arrangement where Israel has overriding security control and other people come in and work with the population there on reconstruction and rebuilding. And because the situation is so dire in Gaza, after so many years of Hamas control and after this war, it's crucial that people who want to leave can leave. Now, it's clear that people want to leave. I saw a poll before October 7th that half the people of Gaza would love to emigrate, right? The fact that you keep them there, and somehow that's a good thing, I just don't understand. I'm not saying, as I think was said in Washington by the Prime Minister and the President, no one wants to, do a forced relocation of people. That's not being talked about. But to give people who want to leave the option to leave, it's the most natural thing. The biggest problem has been, up until now, is that people didn't want to receive them. The Arab countries themselves didn't want to receive them. Who'd want to receive?
Well, guess why? Of course they didn't want to. I mean, they're just hypocrites, okay? Like, of course they didn't want. They didn't want to have another group of Palestinian terrorists, Muslim Brotherhood, coming through their borders. And it was very convenient for them to say, oh, Israel, siege on Gaza, Israel, big bad Israel. They and the poor Palestinians in Gaza and Israel. But they wouldn't take them in at all. And we know why. Okay, we understand that.
Well, can we just explain to the people who are following our episode here that people in the West obviously are not very happy with people who might be Islamist extremists coming to be their next door neighbors. But people should understand across the Arab world, people don't want Palestinians either. The Palestinians tore apart the Lebanese internal framework. They were a big contributor to the Lebanese civil war that plagued Lebanon for so many years. In Jordan, they tried to overthrow the regime. Across the Gulf, they're not liked because everyone remembers in the time of the first Gulf War, remember George Herbert Walker Bush and the first Gulf War? So then the Palestinians supported the Iraqi invaders and not the countries that were hosting them. So that they've got serious problems with their Arab brothers and sisters too. And apparently, one of the things that Trump and Netanyahu are working on is to find countries, and according to the gossip at least, is they are talking about specific countries, a small group of countries that will be willing to accept a large amount of Palestinians from Gaza. And you're going to have to rebuild Gaza. It's going to take time. having more people voluntary who want to leave can leave, you allow it more time then to make a better effort to try to rebuild Gaza.
Right. Although at this point, I've got to just tell you, I know there's a lot of talk about that, rebuilding Gaza. And by the way, President Trump had said back there, I'll do it. I'll take over. And by the way, for all we know, he will. An American company has finally took over the humanitarian aid distribution. And aside from Hamas trying to, and the Israeli left trying to get, and others trying to get more humanitarian aid from the UN in areas that Israel already cleared out of terrorists and all that, that foundation has been doing a fantastic job.
Why do we know that? How do we know that? Because one of Hamas's demands in the ceasefire negotiations
Is to take over the food.
No,
food.
they want to go back to the UN system.
Of course.
Why? Because they control that.
Of course.
They control that, and therefore that becomes an integral part of their ability to control the population and to sustain their dictatorial regime. And if you take that away from them, so do you think Hamas is asking for the UN system because they're worried about Palestinian civilians eating well?
They're in cahoots with the UN, and they'll take control of it, and the UN lets them. No, we know that. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has been doing a fantastic job. It took this on, and America, private companies and all that, I would trust them much more than anybody else. And all this business about rehabilitating Gaza, we have heard that since we yanked every last Jew out of Gaza, okay? And I'm sick of it. Billions and billions of dollars and shekels and euros went in there. Every Gazan could have had a swimming pool and a tennis court by now. I don't care. You know what? Let it stay rubble as far as I'm concerned. You get rid, as Netanyahu has said, we will not let Gaza pose a threat to us anymore, okay? And that is the key point here, right? Other people who want to care about buildings in rubble, I care about our buildings rubble. I care about our children, and because we don't initiate anything except peace overtures. And what we get in exchange is bloodshed, killing, and this goes for every time we've made a deal with the Palestinians. And so I would say, no, I'm done. I'm done with that issue. And that is why the Arab countries don't want the Palestinians specifically going there. And one other thing that came out in a poll of Gazans is that if given the choice, they want to, if they leave Gaza, they heard talk of certain countries that would take them in. And they weren't so happy with that. They want to go to Europe and the United States. Oh, surprise, surprise. They want to go to Europe and the United States. That's interesting. The biggest haters of the West, all they want to do is live in the West. And we see that, and we see what's happening to Europe and America as a result of the West, the haters of the West, they love the luxuries of the West. They love the jobs they get, the universities they get. So again, I have to say, the main thing right now that is crucial is for Israel to make sure that we're not slaughtered again by those people. Now, I don't want to hear, yes, I know not everybody, there are innocents. I don't care. I don't care, okay? Every country has innocents and people who are guilty. The issue is what you do about it when it poses a serious threat, and we saw the results of that. And by the way, some of us knew it was leading up to that. I'm sorry, okay? The bleeding hearts who kept saying, no, and really they just need jobs and they just need this. Some of us knew that was a lie. They were committing terrorism all along. They were throwing incendiary balloons over the fence every Friday leading up to October 7th. We saw it, all right? And we just don't like to believe that people don't have the same care about human life as we do. Well, you know what? They don't.
So I agree with you in that. I don't think there's a chance for Israeli-Palestinian peace anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that peace is going nowhere, because as we heard from Washington, both Trump and Netanyahu appear to be very committed to expanding the Abraham Accords to bring in new partners. And I would argue that's where the energy should be at the moment, because there's no chance. Maybe you can try to stabilize the situation between Israel and the Palestinians, but that's probably the best you can do. To try to prevent any more bloodshed. You could try to, as I say, stabilize the situation. But peace breakthroughs you're not going to have between Israelis and Palestinians anytime soon. And so we should focus today on Israel and the Arab world, Israel and the Muslim world, and there's great potential. And I think, interestingly, I think a lot of the Arab countries saw Israel behave very effectively during the recent, what was it called, the 12-day war with Iran. And there's a desire in the Arab world for moving forward with Israel, especially when that is sponsored by the United States, and they can also get goodies from the United States as part of the process. We're talking about countries in the Gulf. The most important one in the Gulf is Saudi Arabia. They're talking of a breakthrough there. People say Oman as well. Oman's a smaller country. It's not the big prize Saudi Arabia is, but it's still an important Arab country in the Gulf. And people are talking more interestingly about Syria, and if Syria follows, then Lebanon comes automatically, and could be very interesting. Now, Syria, you said correctly that this guy is a former extremist and a terrorist wearing a suit.
Extremist?
He was an
ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Extremist, is something I reserve for the Israeli left-wing newspapers. This guy is Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
So I'm not denying that for a moment. And he's put on a suit and he says he's changed, okay? But he's fighting for his political life. And on the assumption that Israel's not going to be asked to come down from the Golan Heights or something, yes? In other words, we're not going to take a security risk. But on the chance that if he, by upgrading his relationship with Israel, he believes he stabilizes himself, right? I think it's something Israel should be open to, especially if it gives Lebanon the excuse to follow through. And in Lebanon, there are many people who do want a better relationship with Israel. And so I think this is something worth pursuing. I think we have to be aware. I always remember, like anyone who knows the history of the Second World War knows that when Hitler gets elected in Germany in 1933, the first couple of years, he's very nice to all his neighbors because he's weak. And this guy in Syria, he might be nice now to his neighbors because he's weak. So we have to, of course, keep our powder dry, or as President Reagan famously said, I don't want to say it, but Reagan said, trust and verify. I say, don't trust and double verify, yes, especially when you're dealing with people like this. But there is a chance for a breakthrough in the north. Once again, I think Lebanon wants to make peace with Israel. And so if Syria is the way to do that, something also we need to think about, not to take risks on security, but if it's possible to move forward with some sort of deal with Syria, I would do it.
Okay, well, it looks like it's happening to some extent. And one thing is very clear, and this goes back to why it is necessary to have total victory in Gaza. I know people make fun of Netanyahu for saying that. They say, what does that mean? And there is no such thing. Let me tell you, to all those people who say, end the war, including members of the U.S. administration, win the war, not end the war. End the war in victory and defeat of Hamas. What is end the war? End the war like retreat, like we did from Lebanon? No. Okay, and why is that crucial? Because those attacks on the Iranian nuclear facilities, if they did anything, they persuaded Saudi Arabia that America and Israel are the strong horses, that and also that Syria, all of these Arab countries were looking, including our Abraham Accords partners, who got very nervous after October 7th, that maybe we weren't the strong horse they had thought, and they were hedging their bets about those normalization deals with us. Those attacks on Iran sealed the deal, so to speak, because they said, wow, okay, and that would bring, if anything would bring Saudi Arabia closer to America, it would be that.
So let's be frank. Israel in our 70-something year history has had days of great success, and we've had terrible days. October 7th was one of the worst days, if not the worst day ever in Israeli history. The worst bloodshed against Jews since the Holocaust, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And we've had great days. There was Entebbe, the famous operation on July 4th, 1776. I remember.
1976.
1976. So it was the bicentennial. That's why it's 70. I'm glad.
That's right.
But
That's right.
In this program, you've corrected me in the past with numbers. I was never a numbers person, right? And there's no doubt that what happened in our relation, in this 12-day war with Iran was like Entebbe, right? It was one Israeli victory after another. We took them by surprise. We took out the targets we wanted to do. We were free to fly over the skies of Iran because we totally neutralized their air defenses. We hit the targets that we needed to hit. It was an serious Israeli victory. And I would think this has shown Israel to be strong, to be dynamic. And I think this makes Israel a more desirable partner for all those moderate Arab states who want to stand up to Iran, who want to stand up to the extremists, their own domestic extremists, regional extremists. And I think we could see, as a result of this 12-day war, we could see the peace in the region, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, go into high gear. It's sort of counterintuitive because a lot of people think, oh, Israel's, attacked and showed itself to be, if you watch, some of the media, Israel's just, killing and shooting from the hip, and it makes the Arabs just hate us more. No. When Israel shows itself to be vibrant and strong and committed to defending itself, actually that makes us a more desirable partner in peace.
That's absolutely right. I'll tell you something before we wrap this up, okay? I would like to say, first of all, I'd like to thank all the viewers who responded to our email, to our request for email suggestions for our topics. And I'd just like to thank all of those who wrote to us this week, and hope that we covered some of the topics that you requested. We attempted to do that. And I have to say that by next week, a lot of what we said here will become, hopefully, it will become more apparent. And we will see by next episode what actually happens and what has happened and where we were right and where we were wrong. And I will just give our email out one more time, and that is undiplomatic@jns.org.
Ruthie, I look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Ditto, Mark.